Picture a modern prison environment. It is a closed, highly regulated system designed to mathematically manipulate human behavior. Administrators enforce this strict physical order using a psychological toolkit known as behavior modification. Inside these walls, the approach works. Institutional programs relying on reward systems routinely produce high levels of compliant behavior among the inmates. However, studies indicate that 81% of experimental programs show this conditioning disappears almost entirely when the subject returns to the community. We are going to look at the exact mechanics of these conditioning programs and examine why a psychological model optimized for a cell block inevitably breaks down in the free world. Observed compliance is often merely an artifact of strict environmental control, entirely separate from a genuine transformation of the individual. The foundation of this institutional management traces back to psychologist B.F. Skinner. He argued that behavior is dictated by its consequences. This schematic illustrates a Skinner box, the tool he used to demonstrate operant conditioning. When a rat pressed a lever in response to a light signal, it received food. But if the reward was removed, the rat simply stopped pressing the lever. Decades later, researcher John B. Calhoun added another layer to this science by testing how severe spatial restriction alters baseline animal behavior. Calhoun provided an enclosed mouse colony with unlimited food but limited space. As the population grew and the pens became dangerously overcrowded, normal social structures collapsed. The mice resorted to intense territorial defense, severe aggression, and eventually complete social withdrawal. You can observe the same phenomenon in the modern American prison. Correctional facilities are overcrowded, high-stress environments that naturally generate conflict and emotional breakdown. Because prisons artificially mimic the extreme stressors of these animal models, administrators utilize operant conditioning as a primary method for maintaining basic physical order. Institutional behavior modification relies on the concept of tabula rasa, the blank slate. The theory assumes deviant behavior is entirely learned from external forces, meaning it can be overwritten with the right pressures. This theory was put into practice at facilities like the Robert F. Kennedy Youth Center, heavily utilizing a system known as a token economy. In a token economy, acceptable behaviors are mapped. Residents perform inputs, like attending class or working, and earn points in return. Those points buy improved living conditions, clothing, and recreation. Comforts are transformed into commodities, purchased by demonstrating obedience. Unlike deeper sociological approaches, this mechanical system treats delinquency lightly. It assumes an individual commits criminal acts without actually holding any internal commitments to a criminal lifestyle. While individual counseling and interviews are often considered superior for evaluation, they are extremely time-consuming. Academics often advocate for behavior modification because it offers a faster and cheaper alternative for institutional management. A token economy does not cure the underlying causes of criminality. It simply purchases temporary conformity using the only currency available inside a closed ecosystem. The effectiveness of these token economies introduces a serious ethical danger. When administrators see how easily they can manipulate behavior in a controlled setting, they are tempted to push those techniques to coercive extremes. In the early 1970s, the federal prison system introduced the START program at facilities in Springfield and Butner. The objective was to isolate the most uncontrollable prisoners and subject them to intensive conditioning until they were receptive enough to return to the general population.
The program immediately sparked intense controversy. Activists labeled the techniques Orwellian brainwashing, and the intense psychological pressure was linked to inmate strikes, riots, and even suicides. This pushback highlighted massive legal roadblocks. Inmates leveraged the due process concept of civil rights, specifically citing Title 42, Section 1983 of the United States Code, which prohibits the violation of civil rights under color of law. Courts recognized a clear jurisprudential limit. The state cannot use extreme therapies to psychologically or chemically alter a person's personality without their informed consent. An institution's power to enforce operant conditioning hits a hard ceiling. It is legally capped by the ethical mandate that human beings cannot be treated purely as programmable subjects, which brings us back to that 81% failure rate. If these conditioning models can exert such heavy control over inmates, why do they evaporate almost instantly when the individual is released?
The model fails because it assumes that the punishment and reward incentive structure remains static, even as the physical environment changes. In an institution, a warden sits atop a rigid hierarchy, controlling rewards. But in the community, that hierarchy disappears into a decentralized peer network. A compliant student released from a youth center enters a neighborhood where a local gang dictates the social order. The student acts compliantly and pays the gang their milk money, only to get mugged on the way home anyway. The institutional reward loop is instantly shattered by the violent reality of the street. Psychologists call this situational learning. Operant conditioning is strictly tied to the immediate physical environment enforcing it. Remove the environment, and you remove the conditioning.
For behavior modification to actually stick outside its original setting, it requires years of continuous, uninterrupted exposure, similar to a 4-year term at a military academy. The standard justice system simply cannot provide that level of consistency. Institutional conditioning is instantly overwritten by street-level survival mechanics. The real world does not run on a predictable point system. Behavior modification remains an excellent tool for managing large populations in an institution, but it fails as a holistic cure for delinquency. This is where clinical psychology offers a necessary alternative. Instead of merely forcing external compliance, clinical approaches attempt to identify and resolve internal emotional pressures. Clinicians focus heavily on defense mechanisms. Incarcerated individuals frequently rely on tactics like rationalization and projection, blaming society or the system, to protect their egos and alleviate the anxiety of their failures. Until those internal defense mechanisms are actively identified and dismantled, the individual remains vulnerable. The moment they experience severe street-level stress, their behavior will revert right back to deviance. Programs like Gestalt therapy offer a path forward by helping the individual build genuine self-awareness. The goal is to replace their reliance on environmental support with robust internal self-support. Conditioning systems only care about changing what a person does. Clinical therapies attempt to change how a person understands themselves. Navigating an unstructured democratic society requires an individual to rely on their own internal moral compass, rather than simply obeying the nearest authority figure. A token economy can force a person to act properly while they are being watched, but only internal psychological restructuring provides the tools necessary to survive when the warden is replaced by the reality of the free world.